The morning sun cast long shadows across the CrossFit gym as Sarah Martinez adjusted her worn sneakers and checked her water bottle one last time. At 28, she carried herself with the quiet determination of someone who had learned to ignore whispers and sideways glances. Her petite frame and soft-spoken demeanor often led people to underestimate her, something she had grown accustomed to throughout her life. The gym buzzed with its usual pre-workout energy. Regulars chatted near the pull-up bars while newcomers nervously reviewed the day's workout on the whiteboard. Sarah had been coming here for 3 months, ever since moving to San Diego for her new job as a pediatric nurse. The transition from small-town Montana to a bustling military city had been challenging, but she was determined to build a new life for herself. "All right, everyone, gather around," called out Jake Morrison, the gym's head trainer. His voice carried the authority of someone used to commanding attention. At 35, Jake possessed the lean, muscular build typical of former special operations personnel. His movements were precise and economical, betraying years of military conditioning that civilian life hadn't softened. The dozen or so athletes formed a loose circle around Jake as he explained the day's workout. Sarah listened intently, mentally preparing herself for the challenging routine ahead. She had always been athletic, playing soccer and running track in high school, but CrossFit demanded a different kind of intensity that both intimidated and excited her. "Today we're focusing on functional movements that translate to real-world applications," Jake continued, his eyes scanning the group. "We'll start with a warm-up, then move into strength work, and finish with a metabolic conditioning piece that'll test your mental toughness as much as your physical capabilities." As the group dispersed to begin their warm-up, Sarah noticed 3 men clustering near the heavier weights. Brad Thompson, a stocky insurance broker in his early 30s, seemed to be the unofficial leader of their group. His loud voice and aggressive demeanor dominated most conversations, and he had a habit of offering unsolicited advice to anyone he deemed less experienced than himself. "Look at her trying to keep up," Brad muttered to his companions, nodding towards Sarah as she began her jumping jacks. "I give her another month before she quits. These suburban mums always think they're tougher than they are." His friends, Mike and Derek, chuckled appreciatively. Mike, a real estate agent with a perpetual tan, shook his head dismissively. "She's probably here because her husband told her she needed to lose weight. Happens all the time." Derek, who worked in tech sales, adjusted his expensive workout gear. "Did you see her struggling with those burpees yesterday? I was embarrassed for her. Some people just aren't cut out for this kind of training." Their conversation wasn't as quiet as they thought, and several other gym members overheard their comments. Most chose to ignore the negativity, focusing on their own workouts, but Jake's jaw tightened slightly as he moved between athletes, offering encouragement and technical corrections. Sarah remained oblivious to their comments, concentrating on executing each movement with proper form. She had learned early in her CrossFit journey that consistency and technique mattered more than raw strength or speed. Her nursing background had taught her the importance of body mechanics and injury prevention, lessons that served her well in this demanding environment. The warm-up concluded, and Jake directed everyone toward the strength portion of the workout. Today's focus was deadlifts, a fundamental movement that required significant core stability and posterior chain strength. Sarah approached the barbell with careful attention to her setup, remembering the cues Jake had taught her about proper positioning and breathing. "Feet hip-width apart, hands just outside your legs," she whispered to herself, running through her mental checklist. "Chest up, shoulders back, engage your lats." Meanwhile, Brad loaded his barbell with considerably more weight, making sure everyone noticed his impressive plates. He performed his lifts with adequate technique, but lacked the precision and control that marked truly skilled athletes. His focus seemed more on the numbers than the quality of movement. "Sarah, that looks great," Jake called out as she completed her second set. "Your hip hinge is really improving, and your back position is solid. Add 10 pounds for your next set." The encouragement brought a smile to Sarah's face, but it also drew unwanted attention from Brad's group. They exchanged looks that suggested they found Jake's positive feedback undeserved. 10 more pounds? Mike said loud enough for others to hear. "She's barely lifting the bar as it is. This isn't a yoga class." Jake's expression hardened, but he maintained his professional demeanor. He had served 8 years as a Navy SEAL, including multiple deployments to Afghanistan and Iraq. His experience had taught him to recognize different types of strength, and he saw something in Sarah that others missed. "The deadlift is about progression and consistency," Jake announced to the entire group, his voice carrying clearly across the gym. "Everyone starts somewhere, and the athletes who focus on perfect movement patterns while gradually increasing load are the ones who achieve long-term success." His words were directed at everyone, but clearly meant for those who needed to hear them most. Brad's face reddened slightly, though he tried to mask his irritation with a dismissive shrug. As the strength portion concluded and athletes prepared for the conditioning workout, Sarah felt a familiar mix of nervousness and determination. The final piece consisted of a 20-minute time domain that combined rowing, kettlebell swings, and box step-ups. It was designed to test both physical capacity and mental resilience. Remember, this is about pacing and consistency, Jake instructed. Find a rhythm you can maintain for the full 20 minutes. It's not a sprint. The workout began with the sharp sound of Jake's timer, and immediately the gym filled with the rhythmic sounds of rowing machines and the thud of kettlebells. Sarah settled into her pace early, focusing on smooth, controlled movements rather than trying to match the intensity of stronger athletes around her. Brad and his friends started aggressively, attacking each movement with maximum effort. Their strategy might have been impressive for a shorter workout, but Jake knew from experience that their pace was unsustainable for the full duration. By the 10-minute mark, the differences in approach became apparent. Sarah maintained her steady rhythm, showing no signs of the fatigue that was beginning to affect others. Her breathing remained controlled, and her movement quality hadn't deteriorated despite the mounting challenge. In contrast, Brad's group was already showing signs of distress. Their initial burst of energy had given way to labored breathing and sloppy technique. Mike had to take several extended breaks while Derek struggled to maintain his kettlebell swing form. "Looking good, Sarah," Jake said as he moved through the gym, monitoring everyone's progress. "Stay with that pace. You're exactly where you need to be." His encouragement wasn't lost on the other athletes, several of whom had begun to recognize Sarah's consistent performance. She might not have been lifting the heaviest weights or moving the fastest, but she was demonstrating the kind of steady determination that often proved more valuable than raw athleticism. With 5 minutes remaining, the workout reached its most challenging phase. This was where mental toughness became as important as physical capacity, where athletes had to push through fatigue and discomfort to maintain their effort. Sarah's face showed the strain of exertion, but her movements remained controlled and purposeful. She had found a zone where discomfort existed but didn't overwhelm her ability to continue. Years of 12-hour nursing shifts had taught her about pushing through physical and mental challenges. Brad, meanwhile, was struggling significantly. His early aggressive pace had depleted his energy reserves, and he was now moving considerably slower than Sarah despite his earlier confidence. The irony wasn't lost on the other athletes who had witnessed his earlier comments. As the final seconds ticked away, Jake called out encouragement to everyone still working. 10 seconds. Finish strong. Every rep counts. Sarah completed her final kettlebell swing just as the timer sounded, immediately bending over with her hands on her knees as she caught her breath. Sweat dripped from her face, and her muscles trembled with fatigue, but there was satisfaction in her expression that came from knowing she had given her best effort. "Outstanding work today, everyone," Jake announced as athletes began cooling down and cleaning their equipment. "Remember, fitness is about consistency and progress, not perfection. Every workout is an opportunity to improve." As people began to disperse, Jake approached Sarah with a bottle of water and a genuine smile. "That was really impressive today. Your pacing was perfect, and you never compromised your form, even when things got tough." "Thank you," Sarah replied, still breathing heavily but clearly pleased with her performance. "I'm starting to understand what you mean about finding your own rhythm instead of trying to keep up with everyone else." Jake nodded approvingly. "That's the key to long-term success in any physical endeavor. You're building a foundation that will serve you well as you continue to develop." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of weights being dropped carelessly across the gym. Brad was clearly frustrated with his performance, taking out his irritation on the equipment rather than acknowledging his own tactical errors. "Some people never learn," Jake muttered quietly, though his attention remained focused on Sarah. "You've got something special. The ability to stay composed under pressure and focus on process over outcome. That's a rare quality." Sarah appreciated the feedback more than Jake probably realized. Growing up, she had often been overlooked in favor of more naturally gifted athletes or more outgoing personalities. Having someone recognize her particular strengths felt validating in a way she hadn't experienced in years. As they talked, other gym members approached to offer their own encouragement. Maria, a firefighter in her 40s, praised Sarah's consistent effort. "I love watching you work out because you remind me that it's not about being the strongest or fastest. It's about showing up and doing your best every day." Tom, a retired Marine officer, nodded in agreement. "You've got the mindset of a true athlete." Keep doing what you're doing. The positive feedback from respected gym members created a stark contrast to the negativity that Brad's group had been spreading. It was becoming clear that Sarah's approach was earning respect from people who understood what real fitness and toughness looked like. However, not everyone was pleased with the attention Sarah was receiving. As she gathered her belongings and prepared to leave, Brad approached with his usual swagger, though his earlier struggles had dimmed some of his confidence. "Not bad for a beginner," he said with forced casualness. "You'll probably want to work on your speed, though. Technique is fine, but in the real world, intensity matters more." Sarah looked up at him with polite confusion. "I'm sorry, I don't think I know what you mean. Jake has been helping me focus on building a strong foundation before worrying about speed." Brad's expression suggested he found her response naive. "Jake's a good trainer, but he's probably just being nice because you're new. In real CrossFit competitions, they don't care about your form if you can't keep up with the pace." The comment stung more than Sarah wanted to admit, not because she believed it was true, but because it attacked her growing confidence in her approach to training. She had worked hard to develop her technique and was proud of her consistent progress. Jake, who had been organizing equipment nearby, overheard the exchange. His jaw tightened, and he moved closer to the conversation with the measured steps of someone accustomed to handling difficult situations. "Actually, Brad," Jake interjected, his voice calm but carrying an edge of authority, "Sarah's approach is exactly what I recommend to all my athletes." Sustainable progression built on solid fundamentals will always outperform unsustainable intensity in the long run. Brad's face flushed at being corrected in front of other gym members. "I'm just saying that in my experience, people who can't handle the heat usually don't last long in environments like this." The comment hung in the air like a challenge, and Jake's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. To most observers, he appeared unchanged, but those with military experience might have recognized the subtle shift in posture that indicated his patience was being tested. "Your experience," Jake repeated slowly, his voice carrying a quiet intensity. "And what exactly qualifies you to judge someone else's capacity for handling pressure?" The question was asked with professional politeness, but there was something in Jake's tone that suggested Brad should tread carefully. Unfortunately, Brad misread the situation entirely, interpreting Jake's calm demeanor as weakness rather than restraint. "I've been doing CrossFit for 5 years, Brad replied with defensive pride. "I've competed in local competitions and placed in the top 10 several times. I know what it takes to succeed in this sport." Jake nodded thoughtfully, as if considering Brad's credentials seriously. "That's impressive. 5 years is a significant commitment, and competition experience definitely has value." His reasonable response seemed to encourage Brad, who continued more aggressively. "Exactly. So when I see someone getting praised for barely keeping up, it bothers me because it lowers the standard for everyone else. This gym used to be for serious athletes." Several other gym members had stopped their conversations to listen, sensing that the exchange was escalating beyond casual disagreement. Sarah felt deeply uncomfortable being the center of controversy and began to gather her things more quickly. "I should probably go," she said quietly to Jake, not wanting to cause any more problems. "Actually," Jake replied, his attention still focused on Brad, "I think this conversation might be educational for everyone involved." He turned back to Brad with the kind of calm confidence that often preceded significant lessons. "You mentioned that this gym used to be for serious athletes. I'm curious what you think defines a serious athlete." Brad, emboldened by what he perceived as an opportunity to showcase his knowledge, launched into an explanation. "Serious athletes push themselves to their limits every workout. They compete against others and themselves. They don't make excuses for poor performance, and they definitely don't need constant encouragement just to finish a basic workout." Jake listened patiently, nodding occasionally as if genuinely considering Brad's perspective. When Brad finished, Jake paused for a moment before responding. "Those are interesting points," Jake said finally. "Let me ask you something else. In your 5 years of CrossFit experience, have you ever been in a situation where your life or someone else's life depended on your physical and mental performance under extreme stress?" The question caught Brad off guard. "Well, no, but I don't see how that's relevant to gym training." Jake's smile was patient but carried an edge that hadn't been there before. "It's relevant because it helps establish context for what we mean when we talk about real toughness and pressure." He gestured towards Sarah, who was still trying to quietly exit the conversation. Sarah works as a pediatric nurse. She spends 12-hour shifts on her feet, making life and death decisions while caring for sick children and supporting terrified families. She comes here after those shifts to continue improving herself, not because she has to, but because she chooses to. The gym had grown noticeably quieter as other members realized they were witnessing something significant. Jake's voice remained calm, but his words carried increasing weight. "You talk about pushing limits and handling pressure," Jake continued, "but I'm curious how you think your CrossFit competition experience compares to performing CPR on a 7-year-old while their parents scream in panic." Brad's confident expression began to falter as he realized the conversation was moving into territory where his credentials might not carry much weight. The silence in the gym stretched uncomfortably as Brad struggled to formulate a response to Jake's pointed question. Other members had stopped pretending to organize their equipment, openly watching the exchange unfold. Sarah stood frozen near the exit, caught between wanting to escape the attention and feeling oddly protected by Jake's unexpected defense of her character. That's different," Brad finally managed, his earlier confidence noticeably shaken. "I'm talking about athletic performance, not work situations." Jake nodded slowly, as if genuinely considering the distinction. "You're right, they are different contexts. But here's what interests me about your perspective on athletic performance." He moved closer to Brad, not aggressively, but with the kind of measured approach that commanded attention. "You've been coming here for 5 years, competing in local events, placing in the top 10. That's a solid recreational athletic career." Brad's posture straightened slightly at what sounded like acknowledgement of his achievements, but Jake wasn't finished. "What I'm curious about is how you define serious athlete when you haven't actually tested yourself in situations where performance matters beyond personal satisfaction or local bragging rights." The comment hit Brad harder than he expected. "What do you mean? Competition is competition. Pressure is pressure." Jake's expression remained neutral, but there was something in his eyes that suggested he was drawing from experiences Brad couldn't comprehend.